Violence in cities large and small, well, it is simply overwhelming. 77 people were shot just this weekend in Chicago, 14 of them killed, including a 7-year-old girl and a 14-year-old boy. There was a nightclub shooting in South Carolina that left 2 people dead, 8 others wounded. In Alabama, an 8-year-old boy was killed in a shooting at a shopping mall that left 3 other people hurt there. And in Atlanta, the mayor saying enough is enough after more than 20 people were shot. Among the victims, an 8-year-old girl killed right near the Wendy's where Rayshard Brooks had been shot.
We are doing each other more harm than any police officer on this force. We've had over 75 shootings in this city over the past several weeks. You can't blame that on APD.
We understand the frustration of Rayshard Brooks. We understand. We ain't got nothing to do with it. We innocent. We didn't mean no harm. My baby didn't mean no harm. She ain't gonna make her 9th birthday. We ain't doing nothing.
In New York City, at least 12 people killed in more than 40 shootings and a dozen stabbings. In response, the president saying this in a tweet, in part, federal government ready, willing, and able to help if asked. Let's bring in our headliner, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany. Kayleigh, good morning to you. Thanks so much for being here.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Horrific to see what played out in some of these major U.S. cities over the holiday weekend. Deadly shootings, stabbings, children injured, and some cases killed in this violence. Does the president see the need to step in at the federal level in these U.S. cities with the violence?
Well, the president sees this as unacceptable. Look, that pain on that mother's face, that was really hard to watch, to think that 5 children were killed this weekend doing everyday things like going to the mall and in the car with their mother. This is happening across America, and it's unacceptable. And what the president has done is his DOJ, under his leadership, has been aggressively looking at prosecutions. More than that, we've had federal protective services that have been in these states as a backup to local law enforcement. Ultimately, it's the responsibility of state governors and mayors who have the police power to patrol their streets as ascribed in the Constitution. But the president's been doing everything on our part from the federal side and saying that this is unacceptable, and it's time for these Democrat mayors and governors to step up, because no mother should have to experience the pain that I just saw on that mother's face.
Kayleigh, Eric Shawn here in New York. We've seen all these demonstrations continuing, basically against the police. Yes, there have been horrible incidents, but where are the demonstrations for all these victims? This has been going on in Chicago for years. There is carnage on the streets of this country from this uncontrolled violence. It's getting even
worse.
What does the president say about that and the outrage over what's happening?
That's a great point. Where is the outrage for these victims? And in fact, what you're seeing is when you have this outspoken attitude against the police, this defund the police movement, $1 billion taken from the police department in New York, what you see, and AOC saying that didn't go far enough and we have to defund the police, you see a pulling back of law enforcement. We've seen those mass retirements in New York that ultimately lead to the kind of violence that we're seeing in the streets. I mean, we saw in LA when there was an announcement about funding being pulled from LAPD, we saw an increase in homicides. It was over 100% increase. So there are real consequences. We need outrage for these victims and for these horrid incidences of violence that we're seeing that should not be taking place in our streets.
Kayleigh, I want to move on to the spike in coronavirus cases that we're seeing in some areas of the country, in particular in recent weeks. The president said this over the weekend, and it's getting a lot of headlines. Listen.
We have tested almost 40 million people. By so doing, we show cases, 99% of which are totally harmless, results that no other country can show, because no other country is testing that we have, not in terms of the numbers or in terms of the quality.
That's not, especially not backed up by Stephen Hahn, the FDA director. Dr. Fauci is now warning of new coronavirus mutations that cause the illness to spread even faster. Does it help to have the president talk about this disease being harmless in 99% of instances?
Well, the president was making a factual point that most people will recover from coronavirus who get it, that this a very small fraction of people fall victim to coronavirus in a fatal way. And that's because what we're seeing is we have therapeutics, we have ways to treat this. And when you look at the mortality rates across the world, we are far below Italy. We are below Germany. We're below France. And it's because of the great work we've put in. This president takes COVID seriously, but we should note the mortality rate and how well we are doing vis-a-vis the rest of the world.
Is he concerned about the spike in cases that we saw, especially over the weekend?
The president's monitoring it. He understands that there are fires. He noted that on Friday, but he believes that we as a federal government are equipped to handle those fires. We have great therapeutics, dexamethasone and convalescent plasma and remdesivir that are used to treat this, but we're aware of the spikes and we are on it here at the White House.
Kayleigh, do you fear that people perhaps become complacent? You plan a rally, or the campaign plans a rally in Saturday in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. What type of precautions do you think people should take? Should they be wearing masks if they can't social distance?
Yes, so the campaign has been very clear that not only will we be giving out masks, but we recommend the wearing of those masks. It's very important to follow the CDC guidelines. And one other note that I would put here, just to go back to your other question with regard to cases that we're seeing, it's also worth noting what the president consistently emphasizes, that at the height of COVID-19 back in April, we were testing about 150,000. Now we're testing more than 650,000 per day. So when we talk about these fires, the president noted, it's also worth noting when you test at the rate at which we do, you do see a greater number of cases.
I want to throw this up. This is the latest on the hospitalization stats, since we're talking about numbers, and in some cases, that is one of the key stats that we look at. The overall cumulative COVID-19 hospitalization rate, 102.5 per 100,000. So obviously those key high-risk categories are still what we're watching in those cases. Dr. Fauci and others, who does the president listen to the most right now, Kayleigh, as we try to work our way through this disease, considering there's still so much that we don't know and we have so much more to learn about it?
Well, the president hears advice from all kinds of different doctors, Dr. Hahn, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx. The task force comes together, packages that information. The president is regularly, daily briefed on this, in fact. But what the president has seen is we as an American society have stepped up. We have the lowest mortality rate, one of the lowest in the entire world. And that's because of American innovation. That's because under this administration, we've led the way on therapeutics. Under this administration, we've put forward $36 billion to find a vaccine, and we're hopeful that we'll have that by the end of the year. And it's this president who's teared down bureaucratic barriers to pave the way for America to work its way through COVID-19.
And meanwhile, Kayleigh, of course, the president gave that speech at Mount Rushmore. We saw that amazing flyover and the celebration on Saturday night from the Air Force, the B-1 bombers, the B-52 actually up there. Here's the president.